Capcom has thrown away more Resident Evil content than most franchises ever create. Entire games scrapped at 80% completion, protagonists erased from existence, and supernatural horror mechanics abandoned just months before release. That's why today, I'm breaking down the 12 most insane pieces of cut content in Resident Evil history, ranked from interesting omissions to franchise-altering catastrophes, starting with the orphanage monster that never stalked its halls, The Condemned. The RE2, a remake hides concept art for a terrifying enemy that never made it into the final game, and this wasn't some early brainstorming sketch. This was a fully designed creature with a specific location, purpose, and nightmare fuel design that would have changed the orphanage section completely. Meet The Condemned. Concept art unlocked through the Genius Chemist record shows an emaciated humanoid with unnaturally elongated limbs and a metal neck brace holding its head in place. The creature was designed specifically for the orphanage section, where Sherry gets chased. Players would have encountered this thing stalking the halls, hunting Sherry through Chief Irons' personal torture chamber. The design resembles a torture victim, with the neck device suggesting Irons had been experimenting on orphans long before the outbreak. A second piece of concept art shows the Licker Zombie, a bipedal transitional form between human and Licker that would have visualized the V-Act mutation process in real time for the first time in the franchise. But then Capcom made a decision. Instead of implementing The Condemned, they had Chief Brian Irons personally chase Sherry through the orphanage. One human villain replaced an entire enemy type. Developer roundtables confirmed the creature reached the concept finalization stage. The art director approved the design. The orphanage layout was built to accommodate stalker enemy AI. Then the team decided having both Irons and a creature chasing Sherry disrupted the pacing. They cut The Condemned entirely and rewrote Irons' role to fill the gap. The Licker Zombie concept was abandoned because showing the mutation stages, according to data miners analyzing unused enemy slots, would have required 3 separate enemy models and animations that exceeded their polygon budget. Here's what makes this fascinating. The orphanage section has environmental storytelling about a child named Oliver who disappeared during Irons' experiments. The Condemned's torture device design directly connects to Irons' sadistic experiments mentioned in scattered notes throughout the police station. Players have spent 5 years theorizing The Condemned was Oliver, transformed by Irons' pre-outbreak human experiments into this tortured creature that now mindlessly guards the location of its own torture. That single-cut enemy would have provided the orphanage's first genuine threat beyond jump scares, and given Irons' crimes a visible consequence. But if one nightmare creature seems dark, wait until you learn about the cyborg soldier who held up ceilings with his bare hands, Dewey and Gelzer. Resident Evil almost starred a cyborg war veteran with an infrared eye implant instead of Barry Burton. And we have the character portraits, concept art, and developer interviews to prove. These 2 STARS members were fully designed before being completely erased from the franchise. Gelzer was supposed to be the heavy weapons specialist, a massive cyborg with an infrared scope replacing his right eye, built like a tank, designed to dominate combat scenarios. His signature moment was planned for the shotgun trap room. While other players would dodge the trap, Gelzer would use superhuman strength to literally hold up the descending ceiling while you found the deactivation switch. Dewey was his opposite, a tall, thin African-American man designed as comic relief to keep team morale up during the mansion investigation. His full name, Edward Dewey, survived in the RE1 instruction manual as Bravo Team's pilot. That severed hand Joseph finds in the first 5 minutes, that's technically Dewey. But then scenario writer Kenichi Iwao joined the project in August 1995. He read the script with cyborg soldiers and futuristic elements and immediately pushed for changes. Character designer Isao Oishi confirmed in interviews that the original STARS roster included cybernetically enhanced members. The August 4th, 1995 beta build contains both character portraits and the game data. The official Wildstorm Resident Evil comic magazine published an interview where Mikami detailed Gelzer's ceiling rescue scene. All of this existed. All of this was designed, programmed, and ready to ship. Then Iwao convinced the team to drop every futuristic element. Cyborgs didn't fit survival horror's grounded aesthetic. Dewey's comic relief tone clashed with the darker script direction. Both characters were deleted entirely. Gelzer's physique, his military background, and that exact shotgun ceiling rescue were recycled into a brand new character named Barry Burton. Rebecca Chambers and Albert Wesker, originally called Albert Hustler, were added to replace the empty roster slots. Without Kenichi Iwao's last-minute script overhaul, Barry Burton would not exist, and and Resident Evil would have featured cyborg soldiers from day one. But if cutting two characters seems drastic, wait until you hear about the document subplot removed just 1 month before the game went gold. George Trevor's notes. Shinji Mikami removed an entire character's tragic story from Resident Evil just 1 month before release. And 20 years later, that decision became one of the most controversial cuts in the franchise's history because the story was absolutely devastating. George Trevor was the architect who designed Spencer Mansion. The original 1996 game was supposed to include a series of documents written by Trevor himself, discovered throughout the mansion, chronicling his imprisonment and slow death inside his own creation. The documents revealed Spencer's plan in horrifying detail. November 10th, 1967, Spencer invited the Trevor family to the mansion as honored guests. Jessica Trevor and her daughter Lisa were captured immediately upon arrival. George arrived 3 days later and was told his family had left to visit a sick relative. The files tracked his growing horror as he explored the mansion, found evidence of human experiments, and realized Spencer had built the entire structure as a death maze specifically for him. The final document showed George discovering his own pre-made tombstone with his death date already carved. He died of starvation on December 7th, 1967, locked inside his architectural masterpiece. But then Mikami made a call 1 month before the game shipped. He cut every single Trevor document from the final release. The Japanese text was preserved in the Biohazard Saturn pre-order bonus booklet titled The True Story Behind Biohazard. Scenario writer Yasuyuki Saga confirmed in a CrimsonHead.com interview that he wrote the complete Trevor subplot. Press sample CDS sent to journalists before the final cut contained the files. Mikami himself stated in multiple interviews this content was removed just 1 month before completion. The reason given was weak. The story split into 2 narrative threads, and the team wasn't confident they could write George's descent into madness effectively. Here's what's wild. The community spent 6 years demanding those files back. Fan translations circulated. Message boards debated what the full story contained. The Trevor subplot became the most famous piece of cut Resident Evil content in existence. Then the 2002 GameCube remake didn't just restore the files, it expanded them into an entire character arc, introduced Lisa Trevor as a tragic boss encounter, and created what most fans consider the remake's single greatest addition to the franchise. The Trevor family tragedy has been referenced in Code Veronica RE7 and became foundational Umbrella Corporation lore. 1 month before release, Mikami cut content that would eventually define Resident Evil's emotional core. But if removing one family story seems significant, wait until you see how much content the RE3 remake deleted from an entire game. Gravedigger and the Gutted Clock Tower. The RE3 remake removed more content than it kept from the original game. And I'm not talking about minor enemy tweaks or simplified puzzles. I'm talking about entire boss fights, massive multi-floor locations, and gameplay systems that define the 1999 original completely erased from the 2020 version. The Gravedigger was the only boss fight besides Nemesis in the original RE3, a giant underground worm with 4 razor-sharp mandibles that erupted through the streets during Jill's escape. The remake removed it entirely despite pre-release screenshots showing what appeared to be a worm-like creature in the sewers. The clock tower was gutted from a major hub location with 5 puzzles, spider enemies, 2 separate Nemesis boss encounters, and the area where Jill gets infected with the T-virus down to an exterior courtyard backdrop for one scripted fight. Raccoon City Park, the Graveyard, City Hall, and the Raccoon Press building were completely eliminated. The Dead Factory, the original's final location, was replaced with Nest 2, a laboratory that felt like leftover assets from the RE2 remake. But then you look at the total package. The remake clocks in at roughly 6 hours for a full playthrough. That's half the length of RE2 remake sold at the exact same $60 price point. Co-producer Pete Fabiano told GameSpot they wanted a singular, more consistent narrative to justify the cuts. Capcom's official statement claimed they streamlined locations for realism, removing areas that served no purpose in Jill's escape route. Critics immediately pointed out the game launched with Resistance multiplayer bundled in to justify the price tag. M2 Studio, the outsourced developer handling the remake, had a significantly shorter development cycle than the team that created RE2 Remake. Community analysis comparing both games showed RE3 Remake had fewer enemy types, fewer puzzles, puzzles, and approximately 40% less total gameplay content than its predecessor, here's the part that made fans furious. The clock tower wasn't just a location, it was where Jill's entire character arc pivoted in the original. You fought Nemesis twice there, got infected, collapsed, woke up days later saved by Carlos, and faced your near death with determination to finish the fight. The remake reduced that entire emotional journey to a single courtyard encounter, where Jill gets tentacled and immediately rescued. Fan recreations of the clock tower in Unreal Engine 5 have millions of views because players wanted to see what Capcom refused to remake. But if cutting locations seems disappointing, wait until you learn about the version of RE4 where Leon fought ghosts that crawled out of paintings, the Hookman and hallucination mechanics. At E3 2003, Capcom showed a version of Resident Evil 4 that looked like a supernatural horror film instead of a survival horror game, and this wasn't concept footage. This was a playable build with fully implemented mechanics that would have made Leon fight literal ghosts. The Hookman was the centerpiece enemy, a ghost-like figure that emerged from paintings, wielding a massive hook and protected by what the developers called a shield of darkness. Leon could only damage him by breaking the shield with his flashlight beam or waiting for environmental lightning strikes to pierce the supernatural protection. Living dolls, both bloodied baby dolls and blonde china dolls, would swarm Leon in groups. The core mechanic involved Leon experiencing hallucinations after being infected with the progenitor virus. He could view a hallucinatory spirit world and fight its residents when fog filled the room, essentially seeing into another plane of reality during gameplay. But then you watch the E3 2003 trailer. Shinji Mikami introduces it personally with the line, Quote Zero writer Yasuhisa Kawamura explained the concept in extensive interviews on CrimsonHead.com. Mikami originally wanted something similar to the horror film The Thing, where you couldn't tell friend from enemy. Kawamura suggested a system built around fears and doubts, where the hallucination mechanic created that paranoia. The Biohazard 4 Secret DVD contains extended footage labeled Hallucination Biohazard 4, showing Leon fighting supernatural enemies in fog-covered rooms. The Biohazard 4 Trial Edition debug menu lists entire sections dedicated to the hallucination system. Kawamura admitted in interviews the Hookman was merely an experiment with no true backstory, but the team had built entire levels around the mechanic. The problem was technical reality. The GameCube couldn't handle what they were building. Kawamura stated there were many obstacles to overcome, and the cost of development was deemed too expensive. The build was, in his exact words, victim of its own ambition. The retail version of RE4 kept exactly one element from this build. The armaduras, those animated suits of armor in Salazar's castle, are direct survivors from the supernatural version. Leon fighting ghosts that crawled out of paintings would have made RE4 unrecognizable compared to the game we got. But if supernatural horror seems extreme, wait until you hear about the remake that cut player choice entirely and erased Barry Burton from the story. 3 endings reduced to 1. The original RE3 gave you 3 different endings based on your choices throughout the game, and the remake looked at that system, at Barry Burton's emotional return, and at player agency itself, and deleted all of it. The 1999 original featured the live selection system. Time decision-making prompts appeared during Nemesis encounters, where you chose between options like fight or run within seconds. Your choices affected immediate story paths, item availability, puzzle solutions, and most importantly, determined which of 3 endings you received. Ending A had you push Nemesis off the bridge before the dead factory. Ending B lets you jump off the bridge yourself, negotiate with Nikolai, and have Barry Burton fly the rescue helicopter. Ending C had you jump, shoot down Nikolai's chopper, and still get rescued by Barry in an alternate version. But then the remake shipped with 1 ending. Jill rescues Carlos, they find their own helicopter, they escape as the city gets bombed, roll credits. Producer Peter Fabiano confirmed to official PlayStation Magazine UK when asked directly about multiple endings with 1 word: no. He told GameSpot the director wanted to tell a consistent story with Jill, and they wanted to keep it cohesive. The live selection system was completely removed. Every decision prompt is gone. Every branching path collapsed into one linear experience. Barry Burton, who survived Raccoon City in the original to return and save Jill one final time, doesn't appear in the the remake at all. Not in a cutscene, not in a file, not even mentioned. Here's what makes this deletion tragic. Barry's appearance in the original RE3 endings was his redemption arc. He betrayed the team in RE1 under Wesker's blackmail, redeemed himself by saving them, and then voluntarily flew back into Raccoon City during its final hours to save Jill Valentine. That's character growth spanning 2 games, erased so Capcom could tell a more consistent story. The community called Barry's removal a travesty and nothing short of a crime against the franchise. But if removing player choice seems disappointing, wait until you learn about the 8 experimental children who murdered each other before Eveline was created. The D series. Eveline wasn't the first bioweapon child the Connections created, and the game files prove 8 other little girls existed before her, with fates so disturbing, Capcom cut the entire document from the final game. Data miners found unused text files in RE7's game data containing a document titled Biological Weapons Development 2. The file lists 8 D-series prototypes with their designated names and what happened to each one. D-001, Dana died from a redacted cause. D-002, Dahlia became decrepit at just 319 days old from rapid aging. D-003, Darlene died from infection. D-004, Dorothy was disposed of due to poor performance. D-005, Dolores committed suicide. D-006, Diana was killed by D-005. D-007, Daniela was killed by D-005. D-008, Doris died from a redacted cause. Then E-001, Eveline was listed as stable. But then you read those middle entries again. D-005, Dolores didn't just kill herself, she murdered 2 of her sisters first. The D-series severed head you find in the actual game is labeled D-005, that's Dolores. The severed arm in the same area belonged to D-002, Dahlia, the one who suffered rapid aging and died at 319 days. The files reveal Eveline carried Dahlia's arm as a treasured possession, described explicitly as a memento mori from one of her sisters. Community researcher Rala Majup documented these findings through extensive data mining, discovering they were older draft documents accidentally left in game files. The original timeline placed the D-series project start in 1997, though the final game changed this to 2000. The document proves the Connections ran this experiment 8 times. 8 little girls created, tested, and either died, were murdered by each other, or disposed of like failed products. Eveline wasn't special. She was just the first one who didn't die or murder her sisters before reaching operational status. But if 8 dead children seem dark, wait until you learn about the boss fight that required you to defeat an entire family. The Heisenberg family. Carl Heisenberg was supposed to be 2 people, not 1, and concept art proves the factory section was designed around fighting his entire mutated family as multi-stage boss encounters. The original design had Heisenberg as twin brothers working together throughout the factory area, but the family went deeper than that. The father was described as the leader of the village, a stoic man with a cane, scraggly Einstein-like hair, a black gas mask, and brown scarf. He was intended as the final boss of the entire factory section. The mother was labeled a subject for brain experiments, with her brain literally exposed and visible. The twin Heisenbergs would have worked in tandem, forcing players to manage 2 separate threats simultaneously during combat encounters. But then you look at the Dimitrescu concept art. Lady Dimitrescu's castle was originally inhabited by dozens upon dozens of daughters. Art director Tomonori Takano confirmed to PlayStation Blog in May 2021 they reduced the daughters to 3, Bella, Cassandra, and Daniela, after trial and error testing the game's tempo. Early daughter designs showed variants with giant scissors, leech-like elongated tongues, and whips as weapons. The factory family consolidation followed the same logic. 4 separate Heisenberg family members with individual designs, movesets, and boss encounters were merged into the single Carl Heisenberg we fight in the final game. The concept art exists in official collections. The developers confirmed the changes in interviews. This wasn't early brainstorming. This was finalized character design that got simplified during playtesting. Village's factory would have been a horror game if you had to fight a father, a brain-exposed mother, and twin brothers across multiple stages instead of one magnetic man and his robot army. But if cutting 3 family members seems significant, wait until you hear about the infection that would have turned Leon's arm into a 15-foot snake. Leon's arm transforming into a 15-foot snake. Leon Kennedy was supposed to mutate into a monster over the course of Resident Evil 4, and his voice actor went on record describing describing exactly how painful and horrifying the transformation would have been. Across multiple canceled RE4 builds between 2001 and 2003, Leon gets infected with the progenitor virus early in the game. The infection progresses throughout gameplay. His left arm contains what the developers called a hidden power. Images from the Biohazard 4 trial disc show Leon with a visibly mutated left arm, discolored and deformed. Trailers included text about the cradle of the progenitor virus, invading, contamination, and possessed. Writer Yasuhisa Kawamura explained Leon was affected by the virus with just a little time left to live, forcing him to fight in what little time he had remaining. But then, Paul Mercier, Leon's voice actor, described what the final transformation looked like. Mercier told Unwired TV in a 2009 interview that the virus was allegedly going to take Leon over completely. His exact words, and it was going to come out of his arm, and his arm was going to turn into a 15-foot snake, and it was going to be so painful. There was nothing to be lived through, and it would eventually kill Leon. The Biohazard 4 Trial Edition shows Leon holding his mutated arm in pain during gameplay. TGS 2002. Trailer footage emphasizes Leon's deteriorating condition throughout the story. Multiple builds featured the infection mechanic as the core narrative driver, with Leon racing against his own transformation to complete the mission. The GameCube couldn't handle the technical requirements. The ambitious infection system with progressive visual mutations and gameplay changes was beyond what the hardware could process. The final RE4 kept infection but removed mutation. Leon gets infected with Las Plagas but never physically transforms. Had the original version shipped, Leon Kennedy would have turned into a monster and died, completely redefining the franchise's approach to protagonist infection. But if Leon mutating seems extreme, wait until you hear about the character who was supposed to save Ethan while wearing a Plague Doctor mask, Ada Wong's Plague Doctor appearance in Village. Ada Wong was supposed to appear in Resident Evil Village wearing a Plague Doctor mask and saving Ethan's life, and concept art proves this wasn't early brainstorming. This was a finalized character design with a specific story role. Ada was planned as a mysterious masked person that saves Ethan during the Four Lords trial. She would wear a Plague Doctor outfit resembling Eileen the Crow from Bloodborne, complete with a beaked mask and long coat. The design fit Village's gothic horror aesthetic perfectly. Ada would be investigating the village independently, working her own agenda separate from Chris Redfield's operation, Blue Umbrella's involvement, and Mother Miranda's experiments. Players would encounter her multiple times throughout the story as she intervened at critical moments before disappearing into the shadows. But then the developers decided too many parties were already involved in the village incident. The tragedy of Ethan Winter's artwork gallery, included in the Trauma Pack DLC Deluxe Edition, contains the full Plague Doctor Ada concept art with notes confirming her planned role. The official reason for the cut states, quote 2, the team felt adding Ada's independent investigation created narrative clutter. Chris and the BSAA were already operating in the village. Mother Miranda's faction controlled the Four Lords. Blue Umbrella had connections to the bioweapons. The developers believed a fifth party investigating simultaneously would confuse players about who was working toward what goal. Ada Wong's last major appearance was Resident Evil 6 in 2012. Village would have been her grand return after nearly a decade of absence. The Plague Doctor design would have been Ada's most visually striking appearance in franchise history, and she was cut for pacing concerns. But if removing one character seems disappointing, wait until you learn about the cancelled RE4 that accidentally created an entirely different video game franchise. Resident Evil 4 literally became Devil May Cry. The very first version of Resident Evil 4 didn't just get cancelled, and it didn't just influence another game. It spawned an entirely separate franchise that defined a genre and sold over 30 million copies. Director Hideki Kamiya started developing RE4 in late 1999 for PlayStation 2. The protagonist was named Tony, not Leon. He had superhuman abilities explained through biotechnology. Kamiya wanted a cool and stylish theme, implementing a dynamic camera system because the playable character didn't look brave and heroic enough from fixed camera angles. The development team traveled to the UK and Spain for 11 days, photographing Gothic statues, bricks, and stone pavements for environmental textures. Concept art shows Tony standing in Spencer's bedroom, directly connecting this version to Resident Evil's established world. But then you read Kamiya's own words from the Devil May Cry development column. Kamiya stated about a year and a half ago the scenario was written, and at that time, it was still Biohazard 4. He took the project forward with a focus on the main theme of coolness, incorporating this into the world of Biohazard. Executive producer Shinji Mikami Mikami watched development progress and felt it strayed too far from the series' survival horror roots. E3 2001 interviews on IGN documented Mikami gradually convincing the staff to spin it off as an independent game. The UK and Spain photography research that was supposed to texture RE4's environments became Devil May Cry's gothic castle aesthetic instead. Capcom's official Devil May Cry website columns archive the entire transition. Concept art exists showing Tony and Resident Evil locations before the character was redesigned into Dante. The gameplay mechanics designed for RE4, the camera system, the stylish combat focus, all migrated intact to the new project. Devil May Cry released August 2001 and defined the hack and slash action genre. The franchise has sold over 30 million copies across 5 mainline games, multiple special editions, and a reboot. Meanwhile, RE4 went through 3 more complete rebuilds before finally releasing in 2005. This is the only time in gaming history where a canceled game spawned an entirely different franchise that continues to this day. But if one game becoming another franchise seems impossible, wait until you learn about the 80% complete version of RE2 that would have ended Resident Evil forever. RE 1.5. Capcom threw away an 80% complete game and started Resident Evil 2 from scratch. And if they hadn't made that decision, the franchise would have ended in 1998 with Claire Redfield never existing and Umbrella Corporation destroyed forever. Resident Evil 1.5 is the unofficial name for the original version of RE2 that was 60 to 80% complete before being entirely scrapped. This wasn't cut content within a game. This was a finished game that Capcom deleted and rebuilt from zero. Claire Redfield didn't exist. The female protagonist was Elza Walker, a blonde motorcycle racer and Raccoon University student with a confident, rebellious personality. She crashed her motorcycle into the RPD entrance while fleeing, infected, and never crossed paths with Leon's story. The series was supposed to end. Producer Shinji Mikami intended RE 1.5 as the franchise's conclusion, putting all unanswered questions to rest. Umbrella Corporation was completely destroyed in this version based on STARS survivor testimony. No ongoing villain, no future sequels. But then you look at the other massive differences. Marvin Branagh was Leon's active sidekick throughout the entire game instead of dying in the first 10 minutes. Brian Irons was a helpful professional police chief, not the psychopathic Umbrella collaborator. Linda, an Asian Umbrella researcher retrieving the G-Virus, would eventually become Ada Wong. The RPD was a modern, sterile police precinct inspired by John Carpenter's assault on Precinct 13, nothing like the Gothic Art Museum conversion. Characters had an armor and visible damage system with 3 tiers of equipable protective gear showing progressive battle damage. A partially complete build dated November 5th, 1996 was obtained from an estate sale of a deceased Capcom employee and publicly leaked February 17th, 2013. The Jump Festival 96 footage exists. The April 1997 Tokyo Game Show appearance is documented. Team EGAS has spent over a decade working on restoration projects. Capcom officially acknowledged RE 1.5 by including an Elza Walker costume in the RE 2 2019 remake Deluxe Edition. Mikami explained his decision in a 1998 Game Fan interview. The completion of the original Resident Evil 2 had been 60% when he decided to scrap it. The reason is that it was no fun at all. No one element was specifically boring, just everything as a whole. He believed the modern RPD design was too sterile and boring compared to Spencer Mansion. Director Hideki Kamiya was into action films rather than horror, so RE 1.5 didn't offer the same frightening experience. Newly hired writer Noboru Sugimura convinced them the story needed Claire as Chris's sister to tie the games together. If RE 1.5 had shipped, Resident Evil ends as a duology. Claire Redfield, star of RE2, Code Veronica, Revelations 2, and the Netflix series never exists. The Umbrella was destroyed in 1998. The iconic art museum RPD is never created. Ada Wong is Linda. Brian Irons is remembered as a helpful ally. Every Resident Evil game from RE3 onward simply doesn't exist in any recognizable form. The decision to scrap 60 to 80% of a completed game and start over is considered industry suicide. That decision created one of the most beloved survival horror games ever made and enabled a franchise that has sold over 150 million copies across 25 years. But these aren't 12 isolated incidents. Every single one of them connects to something bigger about how Capcom builds Resident Evil games and why cut content matters more in this franchise than any other.